The city was silent and broken, smoke slowly rising from the ruins of tall buildings. The war had ended only a few hours earlier, but the air still felt heavy with danger and loss. Sergeant Daniel Hayes moved carefully through the destroyed streets. His uniform was dusty and torn, and his face showed the exhaustion of a soldier who had not slept in 2 days. He was part of a human peacekeeping unit sent to help during a conflict between alien factions on a distant colony world. But the mission had gone terribly wrong. The battle had separated him from his team, and now he was completely alone. Daniel looked around the empty street. Shattered metal and broken glass covered the ground. A burned vehicle lay on its side, and distant fires still glowed in the fading light of the alien sun. His throat felt dry, painfully dry, slowly. He reached into the small pack on his back and pulled out a single bottle of water. It was the last one he had. Daniel stared at it for a moment. Turning the bottle in his hand, the clear liquid inside looked more valuable than gold. He had been walking for hours, and he did not know where the nearest safe base was. This water might be the only thing keeping him alive. He twisted the cap slowly, preparing to take a small sip. Then he heard something. A faint sound. Daniel froze. At first he thought it was just the wind moving through broken walls. But then he heard it again. A quiet cry. It sounded small, weak, and scared. Daniel closed the bottle and looked around carefully, his soldier instincts immediately alert. "Hello?" He called out softly. No answer came, only silence and distant crackling fires. Then the cry came again, this time clearer. It was coming from somewhere behind a collapsed wall nearby. Daniel moved slowly toward the sound, stepping over broken stone and twisted metal, every movement careful, his hand resting near the small pistol on his belt. The battlefield had taught him one thing. Sometimes danger sounded like weakness. But as he reached the broken wall, he realized this sound was different. This was not a trap, it was a child crying. Daniel pushed aside a loose metal panel and looked into a small space between the ruins. There, hiding in the shadows, was a small figure. It was an alien child. The girl looked no older than 6 years by human standards. Her skin was soft blue, almost glowing in the dim light. Her large eyes were bright silver, filled with fear and tears. She looked incredibly weak. Her small hands trembled as she held onto a broken piece of metal for support. The moment she saw Daniel, she flinched slightly, but she did not run. She was too tired to move. Daniel slowly knelt down to her level, keeping his voice calm and gentle. "Hey, there," he said quietly. "It's okay, I'm not going to hurt you." The alien girl stared at him with wide eyes, studying his face carefully. She tried to speak, but her voice was dry and weak. Water," she whispered. Daniel felt a heavy silence fall over the moment. His eyes slowly moved to the bottle still in his hand. The last bottle, his last chance to stay alive until he found help. He looked back at the small alien girl. Her lips were cracked, and her breathing was slow and shaky. She would not survive long without water. Daniel sighed quietly. War had taken many things from him, but it had never taken his humanity. Without another word, he unscrewed the cap of the bottle again. He held it carefully to the girl's hands. "Here," he said gently. The girl looked surprised, as if she did not believe what she was seeing. Then slowly, with trembling fingers, she took the bottle. She drank carefully at first, then a little faster, the water clearly bringing life back into her small body. Daniel watched silently. The bottle grew lighter in her hands. Soon it was almost empty. When she finished, the girl looked up at him again, her silver eyes shining in a strange way. For a moment, Daniel thought it was just the reflection of the burning city around them. But then something unexpected happened. A faint blue light began to glow around the alien girl, soft at first, then brighter. Daniel frowned in confusion, leaning slightly closer. "What the?" he muttered quietly. The girl looked at her hands in surprise as the glowing light slowly spread around her. The air itself seemed to vibrate softly. Daniel had no idea what he had just done. But far above the ruined city, hidden deep within the clouds, several massive alien ships suddenly powered on their sensors. Their systems had detected something impossible. The royal energy signal had returned, and it was coming from the ruined city below. From the exact place where a tired human soldier had just shared his last bottle of water with a dying alien child. The soft blue light around the alien girl slowly faded, leaving the ruined street quiet again. The only sounds were distant fires and the wind moving through broken buildings. Sergeant Daniel Hayes stared at the small girl in front of him, unsure of what he had just seen. The child looked just as confused as he was. She slowly looked down at her hands as if she did not understand what had happened either, for a moment. Neither of them spoke. Then the girl looked back at Daniel, her silver eyes calmer now. The water had clearly helped her regain some strength. "Thank you," she said softly. Her voice was still weak, but much clearer than before. Daniel gave a small nod and sat down on a piece of broken concrete nearby. "You're welcome," he replied gently. He looked around the destroyed street again, his soldier instincts reminding him that this place was still dangerous. "Are you alone out here?" Daniel asked. The girl hesitated for a moment before slowly nodding. "My family." "Gone," she whispered. Daniel felt a heavy weight in his chest. War had a way of destroying families, no matter what species they belong to. "What's your name?" he asked. The girl looked at him carefully before answering. "Lyra," she said quietly. Daniel offered a small, tired smile. "Nice to meet you, Lyra. I'm Daniel." For a brief moment, the ruined city did not feel quite as lonely, but that moment ended quickly. From somewhere above them, a low mechanical humming sound echoed through the air. Daniel's head snapped upward instantly. He knew that sound. Drones, enemy search drones. His expression immediately changed from calm to serious. Lyra noticed the change and looked up nervously. "What is it?" she asked. Daniel quickly stood up and looked toward the sky between the broken buildings. Small dark shapes were moving slowly through the smoke-filled air, scanning, searching, and getting closer. "Trouble," Daniel said quietly. He crouched down next to Lyra and spoke quickly but calmly. "We need to hide right now." Lyra looked confused but trusted his tone. Daniel gently helped her stand. She was still weak but able to move now. He looked around quickly and spotted a broken subway entrance nearby, half covered by collapsed debris. "Over there," he said. They moved as fast as they could across the street, Daniel supporting Lyra as they hurried toward the entrance. Above them, the drones continued scanning the ruins, thin beams of red light sweeping across the city streets. One wrong move and they would be spotted. Daniel pulled aside a bent metal gate and guided Lyra down the dark stairway into the underground tunnel. The air inside was cool and quiet, far away from the burning city above. Daniel slowly closed the gate behind them and listened carefully. The faint humming of drones passed overhead for a few seconds before fading into the distance. Only then did Daniel allow himself to breathe normally again. Lyra sat down on the dusty subway floor. Clearly exhausted from the short run, Daniel knelt nearby, keeping watch toward the entrance just in case. After a moment, Lyra spoke again. "Those machines, they look for me," she said quietly. Daniel turned toward her slowly. "For you?" he asked. Lyra nodded, her expression suddenly serious for someone so young. "They hunt my kind," she said. Daniel felt a chill run through him. He had heard rumors during the mission briefings about certain alien species being hunted during the conflict, but he never thought he would meet one of them. Why would they want a child? Daniel asked. Lyra lowered her head slightly. "Because of what I am," she answered. Daniel studied her carefully, remembering the strange blue glow from earlier. "You mean that light?" he asked. Lyra nodded slowly. "My people. We carry energy inside us," she explained softly. Daniel leaned back slightly, trying to process the information. "So those drones are searching the city for you?" he asked. "Yes," Lyra said quietly. For a few seconds, the dark subway tunnel felt much more dangerous. Daniel stood up and began pacing slowly, thinking through the situation like a soldier planning his next move. if the enemy was searching this? Hard for one small alien girl, she had to be extremely important, which meant staying here was not safe. Sooner or later, those drones would search underground too. Daniel stopped pacing and looked back at Lyra. She was watching him carefully, her small hands resting on her knees. Despite everything, she seemed strangely calm when he was nearby, almost as if she trusted him completely. Daniel sighed quietly. This was not his mission. His only goal had been survival. But now things were different. He had already given her his last water. Walking away now was not something he could do. He walked back over and crouched down in front of her. "Lyra," he said calmly. She looked up at him. "We can't stay here," Daniel continued. "The drones will come back, and when they do, we need to be far away from this place." Lyra nodded slowly. "Where will we go?" she asked. Daniel thought for a moment. Somewhere outside the city, there had to be a human evacuation point or a safe zone. It would not be easy to reach, especially with enemy patrols searching everywhere. But it was their best chance. Daniel stood up and offered his hand to her. "We're getting out of this city," he said. Lyra hesitated for a second before placing her small blue hand in his. As they began walking deeper into the dark subway tunnels, neither of them realized that far above the city, powerful alien warships had already begun changing their course. They were heading directly toward the ruined world, toward the place where a single human soldier was protecting someone far more important than he could possibly imagine. The underground subway tunnel was dark and silent. Broken lights hung from the ceiling, and the air smelled of dust and rusted metal. Sergeant Daniel Hayes walked slowly through the tunnel, his small flashlight cutting a narrow path through the darkness. Beside him walked Lyra, the small blue alien girl, trying her best to keep up. Her steps were still weak, but the water had helped her recover a little. Daniel kept looking back at her every few seconds, making sure she was still okay. The tunnel stretched far into the distance, disappearing into shadows. "This place feels like a maze," Daniel muttered quietly. Lyra looked around nervously. "Is it safe here?" she asked. Daniel thought for a moment before answering. "For now, yes," he said. "But we can't stay underground forever." They continued walking for several minutes, their footsteps echoing softly through the empty tunnel. Above them, the ruined city remained full of danger. Enemy drones were still searching, and patrol ships could appear at any moment. The underground path was their only chance to move without being seen. After some time, Daniel noticed a small maintenance door on the side of the tunnel. He carefully pushed it open and looked inside. It was a small storage room filled with old equipment and dusty crates. "This will work," he said quietly. Lyra stepped inside and sat down on a crate, clearly tired. Daniel closed the door and checked the room carefully, making sure nothing dangerous was hiding there. For a few minutes, they both rested in silence. Lyra looked at Daniel curiously. "You protect strangers often?" she asked softly. Daniel gave a small, tired smile. "Not usually," he replied. Lyra tilted her head slightly. "Then why protect me?" she asked. Daniel looked down at the floor for a moment before answering. "Because you needed help," he said simply. Lyra seemed to think about this answer carefully. "My people say humans are unpredictable," she said quietly. Daniel chuckled softly. "Yeah, I've heard that before," he replied. Suddenly a faint rumbling sound echoed through the tunnel walls. Daniel's smile disappeared instantly. He turned off the flashlight and raised a finger to signal silence. Lyra froze, understanding the warning. The rumbling sound grew louder, heavy. Footsteps, metal boots, enemy patrol soldiers. Daniel slowly moved toward the door and carefully opened it, just enough to peek outside. 3 tall alien soldiers were walking down the tunnel. Their armor was dark and sharp-looking, and each carried a glowing weapon. Red scanning lights moved across the walls as they searched. Daniel quietly stepped back into the room and closed the door again. Lyra looked at him with wide eyes. "They found us?" she whispered. Daniel shook his head slowly. "Not yet," he whispered back. "But they're close." He looked around the small storage room quickly, searching for another exit. In the corner he noticed a narrow maintenance ladder leading upward. Perfect. He whispered. He motioned for Lyra to follow him. They moved quietly across the room and began climbing the ladder. The metal creaked softly as they climbed. Daniel moved slowly to avoid making noise. Below them, the patrol soldiers continued walking through the tunnel. One of them stopped suddenly. The soldier's scanning device beeped softly. Daniel froze halfway up the ladder. The alien soldier looked around suspiciously. For a long moment, the tunnel was silent. Then the soldier shook his head and continued walking. Daniel released a quiet breath and continued climbing. At the top of the ladder was a small hatch. Daniel carefully pushed it open. Fresh air rushed into the narrow shaft. They had reached the surface again, but this part of the city looked different. The buildings here were smaller, and most of them had already collapsed. The streets were empty and covered in ash. Daniel helped Lyra climb out of the hatch and gently closed it behind them. They moved quickly between the ruins, staying close to walls and shadows. Lyra suddenly stopped walking. Daniel turned back toward her. "What's wrong?" he asked quietly. Lyra's silver eyes were glowing faintly again. She was looking toward the far side of the city. "They are coming," she whispered. Daniel frowned. "Who is coming?" he asked. Lyra looked at him seriously. "Many enemies," she said. Daniel looked in the same direction but saw nothing yet. Still, his instincts told him she was probably right. "We need to move faster," he said. They continued moving through the broken streets, trying to reach the edge of the city. After several minutes, they reached a high hill made of collapsed buildings. From the top, Daniel could see far across the ruined landscape, and what he saw made his heart sink. In the distance, several armored vehicles and dozens of enemy soldiers were entering the city. They were searching every street, every building, every tunnel. Daniel slowly stepped back from the edge of the hill. "This just became a lot more dangerous," he said quietly. Lyra looked up at him. "Will they catch us?" she asked softly. Daniel looked down at the small alien girl who had trusted him with her life. He shook his head firmly. "Not if I can help it," he said. But deep inside, Daniel knew the truth. They were now running from an entire army, and the journey to safety had only just begun. The wind moved slowly across the ruined hill of broken buildings, carrying dust and ash through the silent air. Sergeant Daniel Hayes stayed low behind a cracked wall of metal, watching the distant enemy patrols entering the city. Their vehicles rolled slowly through the streets like hunting animals, soldiers spreading out in groups to search every building. "They are moving faster," Daniel said quietly. Lyra stood beside him, her silver eyes watching the same distant movement. "They will not stop until they find me," she said softly. Daniel looked at her again, the words echoing in his mind. "Until they find me." He had already guessed that Lyra was important, but the size of the enemy search force made one thing clear: she was far more important than he first thought. Daniel turned toward her and spoke carefully. "Lyra, why are they really looking for you?" he asked. For a moment the small alien girl did not answer. She looked down at the ground, her small blue hands holding the edge of her worn clothing. The wind pushed strands of silver hair across her face. Finally she spoke. "Because of my family," she said quietly. Daniel waited for her to continue. "My people are called the Illyrians," Lyra explained. "We live across many star systems. Our ships protect many worlds." Daniel listened closely, his soldier mind already connecting the pieces. He had heard the name Illyrian before during military briefings. A powerful civilization, ancient, respected, and feared by their enemies. Lyra continued. "My mother is the queen," she said softly. Daniel's eyes widened slightly. "So you're royalty?" he asked. Lyra nodded slowly. "Yes." For a moment Daniel simply stared at her. The small frightened child he had shared his last bottle of water with was actually an alien princess. Suddenly the situation made much more sense. "That explains the army looking for you," Daniel said quietly. But Lyra shook her head slightly. "It is not only because I am princess," she said. Daniel frowned. What do you mean? He asked. Lyra raised one of her small hands slowly. A faint blue glow appeared around her fingers again, soft and gentle like distant starlight. Daniel watched carefully as the light moved like energy through the air. My people carry something called living energy, Lyra explained. It flows inside us from birth. Daniel studied the glowing light with curiosity. So that's what I saw earlier, he said. Lyra nodded. But most Illyrians cannot control it until they are adults, she continued. Daniel suddenly understood where this was going. But you can, he said. Lyra looked down again. Yes, she whispered. The glow around her hand slowly faded. My teacher said it is very rare, she added. Daniel let out a slow breath. A royal child with rare energy powers, now the enemy's desperation. Made perfect sense. If they capture you, Daniel said slowly, they could force you to use those powers. Lyra nodded quietly. They want to control my energy, she said. Daniel looked back toward the distant enemy vehicles again. They're not just hunting a princess, he said. They're hunting a weapon. The wind grew stronger around the hill, making the broken metal structures creak softly. Lyra stepped closer to Daniel. Are you afraid? She asked gently. Daniel looked down at her and gave a small smile. Honestly? He replied. Yes. Lyra looked surprised. Then why stay? She asked. Daniel rested his rifle against the wall and crossed his arms. Because leaving you here alone would be worse, he answered simply. Lyra studied his face for a moment, as if trying to understand the strange logic of humans. My people do not understand humans, she said softly. Daniel chuckled quietly. Sometimes we don't understand ourselves, he replied. For a brief moment they both shared a small laugh. But the peaceful moment ended quickly. Suddenly Lyra's expression changed. Her silver eyes widened slightly as she looked toward the sky. What is it? Daniel asked immediately. Lyra turned slowly toward the city. They are closer, she said. Daniel grabbed a small binocular device from his belt and looked toward the enemy patrols again. His heart sank. More ships were arriving above the city. Now large dark shapes moving through the clouds. Transport ships, reinforcements. Great. Daniel muttered. That's exactly what we didn't need. He lowered the binoculars and looked around the hill quickly. If the enemy sealed the entire city, escaping would become almost impossible. We need to leave right now, Daniel said firmly. Lyra nodded. Where will we go? She asked. Daniel pointed toward the distant mountains far beyond the city ruins. There's a chance a human evacuation outpost is still active there, he explained. It's a long walk, but if we reach it, we might find help. Lyra looked toward the distant mountains. They were far away, barely visible through the dusty sky. That is very far, she said quietly. Daniel gave a small, determined smile. Yeah, he said. But I've walked worse. He picked up his rifle and adjusted the small pack on his back. Then he held out his hand to Lyra again. The small alien princess looked at his hand for a moment before placing her small blue hand into his. Together they began climbing down the ruined hill, moving carefully through the broken city streets. Behind them the enemy army continued closing in and far above the clouds. Powerful alien warships had already begun moving toward the planet. Because somewhere in the ruins below, the lost princess of the Illyrian Empire was running for her life, protected by a single human soldier who had no idea that the fate of two civilizations now depended on him. The sky above the ruined city was growing darker as evening slowly arrived. Long shadows stretched across broken streets and collapsed buildings, making the empty world feel even more dangerous. Sergeant Daniel Hayes moved carefully through the rubble, his rifle ready and his eyes scanning every corner. Behind him walked Lyra, the small alien princess trying her best to keep quiet and stay close. They had already been walking for hours, slowly leaving the center of the destroyed city. The distant mountains Daniel had pointed to earlier were still far away. But at least they were getting closer. The streets here were quieter, but that did not mean safe. Enemy patrols were still searching everywhere. Daniel raised his hand suddenly, signaling Lyra to stop. She froze instantly. Daniel crouched behind a broken transport vehicle and slowly peeked around the corner. 3 enemy soldiers were moving down the street ahead. Their dark armor reflected the red glow of scanning lights attached to their helmets. They were checking every doorway, every window, every hiding place. Daniel quietly moved back behind the vehicle. "Patrol ahead," he whispered. Lyra nodded silently, her silver eyes watching him carefully. Daniel studied the street again in his mind. They could try to sneak around the patrol, but the open street offered almost no cover if the soldiers spotted them. Escape would be nearly impossible. Daniel took a slow breath and looked toward Lyra. "Stay behind me," he said quietly. Lyra looked nervous but nodded. Daniel waited for the patrol soldiers to move farther down the street. The moment they turned the corner of a building, he quickly guided Lyra across the road toward a narrow alley. They moved as quietly as possible, but just as they reached the alley entrance, a loud mechanical sound echoed from above. Daniel looked up instantly. A small enemy drone hovered above the buildings, its red scanning beam sweeping across the street. Beam moved closer and closer, then it stopped directly on them. A loud alarm beeped from the drone. "Run!" Daniel shouted. He grabbed Lyra's hand and pulled her into the alley. Behind them, the drone fired a bright signal flare into the sky. Within seconds, the enemy patrol soldiers turned and began running toward their location. Daniel and Lyra raced through the narrow alley between the broken buildings. Their footsteps echoed loudly as they tried to escape. More drones appeared above the rooftops, scanning the ground. "They found us," Lyra said breathlessly. "I noticed." Daniel replied as they ran. At the end of the alley, they reached another street. But this one was worse. Several enemy soldiers were already arriving from the other side. Daniel quickly pulled Lyra behind a collapsed wall as energy shots blasted against the ruins nearby. Blue sparks exploded in the air. Daniel returned fire with his rifle, forcing the soldiers to take cover. The battle had begun. Lyra crouched behind the wall, watching nervously as Daniel fought. More enemy soldiers were arriving every minute. The sound of armored vehicles echoed from nearby streets. Daniel checked the small ammunition counter on his weapon. Not much left. He looked toward Lyra and spoke firmly. "Listen carefully," he said. Lyra nodded quickly. "You see that tower over there?" Daniel asked, pointing toward a damaged communication tower at the end of the street. Lyra looked and nodded again. "There's an emergency rescue beacon inside that building." Daniel continued. "If we activate it, friendly ships might detect the signal." Lyra looked hopeful. "Then we go together," she said. Daniel shook his head slowly. "No," he said quietly. Lyra's expression changed instantly. "What do you mean?" she asked. Daniel reloaded his rifle calmly. "I'll hold them here," he said. "You run to the tower and activate the beacon." Lyra stared at him in shock. "No," she said quickly. Daniel looked at her with a serious expression. "Lyra, listen to me," he said. "There are too many of them. If we both stay here, they will capture you." Lyra's silver eyes filled with fear. "But you will die," she whispered. Daniel gave a small, tired smile. "That's part of the job sometimes," he replied calmly. Another wave of enemy fire hit the wall beside them, sending pieces of stone flying through the air. Daniel stood up and fired several shots, pushing the soldiers back again. Then he looked down at Lyra. "You have to go," he said firmly. For a moment the small alien princess did not move. Then slowly she nodded. Her small hands trembled as she stood up. Daniel placed a small communication device into her hand. "Press this when you reach the beacon," he said. Lyra looked at him one last time. "Thank you for saving me," she said softly. Daniel nodded once. "Now run," he said. Lyra turned and ran toward the damaged tower across the street. Daniel stepped out from behind the wall and fired again, drawing the enemy soldiers' attention toward himself. Energy blasts exploded around him as the battle intensified. He knew he could not win this fight, but that was not the goal anymore. The goal was time. Time for a small alien princess to reach a beacon. Time for a signal to reach the stars. And time for help to arrive before the enemy could take her. Because one human soldier had already decided that protecting a child was worth any price. The ruined street was filled with smoke, sparks, and the loud sound of energy weapons. Sergeant Daniel Hayes stood behind the broken wall, firing carefully at the enemy soldiers moving closer every second. Bright blue blasts from their weapons struck the ground around him, sending pieces of stone and metal flying into the air. Daniel ducked as another shot hit the wall beside his head. Dust covered his uniform, and his breathing had grown heavy. He quickly checked his rifle. The ammunition counter blinked red. Almost empty, across the street, Lyra ran as fast as her small legs could carry her. The damaged communication tower stood at the end of the road, its metal structure leaning slightly, but still standing. Enemy soldiers were everywhere now, but most of them were focused on Daniel. Exactly as he planned, Daniel fired 2 more shots, forcing a group of soldiers to hide behind a vehicle. "Come on, Lyra," he whispered under his breath. Another drone appeared above the street, its red scanning beam searching the ground. The moment it spotted Lyra running toward the tower, it released a loud warning signal. Daniel looked up immediately. "Not good," he muttered. Several enemy soldiers quickly turned their weapons toward the small alien girl. Daniel stepped out from cover and fired rapidly at them. His shot struck the ground near their feet, forcing them to dive for cover again. "Leave her alone," Daniel shouted. More soldiers began surrounding his position. One of their commanders raised his weapon and shouted something in a harsh alien language. Daniel did not understand the words, but he understood the meaning. They wanted him alive if possible, but they would kill him if necessary. Daniel slowly stepped backward behind the broken wall again. He looked down at his rifle one last time. The counter flashed again. 2 shots left. He sighed quietly. "Well, that's not great," he said to himself. Across the street, Lyra finally reached the base of the tower. The door to the building was half destroyed. She quickly slipped inside. The inside of the tower was dark and filled with broken equipment. Old wires hung from the walls, and sparks flickered from damaged control panels. Lyra looked around nervously. Daniel's small communication device was still in her hand. She remembered his instructions: find the beacon, activate it, call for help. She ran deeper into the building until she found a large control console in the center of the room. A small emergency beacon device was still attached to the panel, but the screen was cracked and the power light was off. Lyra's heart sank. "It's broken," she whispered. Outside the tower, the battle was getting worse. Enemy soldiers slowly closed in around Daniel's position. Energy blasts struck the wall again and again. Daniel fired 1 more shot, forcing the soldier to fall back. Now only 1 shot remained. He leaned against the wall, breathing heavily. His body ached from hours of running and fighting. Still, he looked toward the tower with hope. "Please work," he whispered quietly. Inside the building, Lyra stared at the broken beacon. Her hands trembled as she placed the communication device onto the console. Nothing happened. The machine remained silent. Tears slowly formed in her silver eyes. "I cannot fix it," she said softly. Then she remembered something her teachers had told her many years ago. The energy inside you can connect to machines, if you learn to guide it. Lyra slowly raised her hands toward the damaged beacon. A faint blue glow appeared again around her fingers. The light was weak at first, but it slowly grew brighter. The room filled with soft blue energy. The damaged beacon flickered once, then again, outside the building. Daniel suddenly noticed something strange. A faint blue light was shining from the tower windows. The light grew brighter every second. Enemy soldiers also noticed it. They turned toward the tower in confusion. "What is she doing?" Daniel whispered. Inside the building, the energy around Lyra had grown stronger. The beacon screen flickered again and finally powered on. A signal wave shot upward into the sky like a beam of light. The emergency beacon had activated, far above the planet's atmosphere, deep in the dark silence of space. Several massive alien warships suddenly received the signal. Their systems immediately recognized the energy pattern. It was Royal Illyrian energy. Inside the command ship, an alien officer turned toward his captain. "The princess has been located," he announced. The captain immediately gave the order. All fleets moved to the signal coordinates. Back on the battlefield below, the enemy soldiers had already reached the tower. Several of them forced their way inside the building. Lyra stepped back as the soldiers aimed their weapons at her. The glow around her hands had grown brighter than ever. Fear filled her eyes outside the tower. Daniel heard the sound of soldiers entering the building. His heart dropped. He knew he was too far away to stop them now. But suddenly something unexpected happened. The sky above the ruined city exploded with light. Massive shadows appeared through the clouds. Enormous alien warships descended from orbit, their engines lighting the sky like a second sun. Every enemy soldier froze in shock. Daniel slowly looked up. "Whoa," he whispered. The Illyrian fleet had arrived, and the battle for the lost princess was about to change forever. The sky above the ruined city glowed with powerful blue light as the massive Illyrian warships slowly descended through the clouds. Their engines thundered like distant storms, shaking the broken streets below. Enemy soldiers froze in shock as the enormous ships filled the sky. Sergeant Daniel Hayes looked upward, barely believing what he was seeing. Dozens of advanced alien vessels now hovered above the battlefield. Their sleek silver shapes reflected the fire and smoke of the destroyed city. "Well, that's new," Daniel whispered weakly. The enemy soldiers quickly realized the situation had changed. Some began retreating, while others tried to prepare their weapons. But it was already too late. Bright beams of light shot down from the Illyrian ships, disabling enemy vehicles and weapons in seconds. The entire battlefield suddenly went silent as the advanced alien technology shut down every hostile system. Inside the damaged tower, the enemy soldiers who had surrounded Lyra looked around in confusion. Their weapons suddenly powered off. The glowing energy around Lyra's hands slowly faded as she looked up toward the sky. "They came," she whispered. A moment later, several small Illyrian dropships descended near the tower. Their doors opened, and tall armored alien guards rushed inside. Within seconds, the enemy soldiers were disarmed and captured. Lyra stood quietly in the center of the room as the Illyrian guards knelt before her. "Princess Lyra," one of them said respectfully, "we are here to take you home." Lyra nodded slowly, but instead of moving, she looked toward the broken doorway. "Wait," she said softly. Outside the tower, Daniel was struggling to remain standing. The long battle had taken its toll on his body. His rifle was empty, his uniform torn, and his strength nearly gone. Still, he forced himself to walk slowly toward the tower entrance. He needed to make sure Lyra was safe. Two Illyrian guards stepped outside and immediately noticed him. Their glowing eyes studied the tired human soldier carefully. Daniel stopped a few meters away, raising his hand slowly to show he meant no harm. "I'm guessing you guys are the rescue team," he said weakly. The guards did not answer at first. Instead, they watched him with curiosity. Then Lyra appeared behind them. The moment she saw Daniel, she ran toward him. "Daniel," she shouted. Daniel smiled slightly when he saw her safe. "Well, looks like your ride finally arrived," he said. Lyra stopped in front of him, her silver eyes filled with emotion. "You saved me," she said quietly. Daniel shrugged tiredly. "Someone had to," he replied. Just then, another figure stepped out of one of the dropships. She was taller than the others, wearing elegant armor that shined with soft blue light. Her presence was powerful and calm at the same time. The Illyrian guards immediately bowed their heads. Lyra looked up and smiled. "Mother," she said. The Illyrian queen walked forward slowly, her eyes focused on her daughter. For a moment, she simply placed her hands on Lyra's shoulders, checking that she was safe. Then Lyra turned and pointed toward Daniel. "He protected me," Lyra explained. "He gave me his water when I was dying." The queen slowly turned her gaze toward the human soldier. Daniel suddenly felt very small under the attention of such a powerful being. The queen studied him carefully, as if measuring something deeper than his appearance. "You are human," she said calmly. Daniel nodded once. "Yes, ma'am," he replied. The queen looked toward the battlefield around them, then back at him. "You stood against an army to protect a child that was not your own," she said. Daniel gave a small, tired smile. "Children are everyone's responsibility," he answered. For a moment the queen said nothing, then she nodded slowly. "You have shown great courage and kindness," she said. She raised one hand slightly above them. The Illyrian fleet responded instantly. Across the sky, hundreds of lights ignited. As the warships repositioned themselves over the planet, Daniel looked upward in surprise. "What's happening?" he asked. The queen looked back at him. "From this day forward," she said clearly, "the Illyrian Empire will remember the actions of humanity." She paused before continuing. "No world under our protection will ever threaten your species again." Daniel blinked in disbelief. "You're protecting humanity?" he asked. Lyra smiled proudly beside her mother. "One human protected me," she said. "So now we protect all humans." Daniel laughed softly, shaking his head in amazement. "All this because I shared one bottle of water," he said. Lyra nodded happily. "Sometimes small kindness changes the universe," she replied. The queen turned toward her fleet and gave the final command. The massive warships slowly began lifting back into the sky. The war on the ruined planet was over. Peace would soon return. And far above the clouds, the stars seemed to shine a little brighter, because on that broken battlefield, a single human soldier had reminded the galaxy of something very important, that true strength was not found in power or weapons, but in the simple choice to help someone who needed it most.